Hi there. Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. Now we have Jeffrey Thompson. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi. Good to be here.
So what have you been up to lately?
That's a loaded question.
Let me read your bio first, and that will kind of take care of a lot of it. Okay. So Jeffrey is a renowned expert in sound therapy with over 4 decades of pioneering work in the scientific use of sound for healing. Beginning his research in 1980 at his Holistic Health Center in Virginia, Dr. Thompson developed innovative techniques using precisely tuned sound frequencies for chiropractic spinal adjustments, cranial sacral therapy, and influencing the autonomic nervous system. This groundbreaking work led him to establish a research center in San Diego in 1988 to focus full-time on sound therapy. Also a talented musician and composer, he's created over 90 audio programs integrating his patented brainwave entrainment technologies. His therapeutic audio programs are widely used by holistic practitioners, including medical doctors, chiropractors, and psychotherapists, as well as by the general public. His works, such as the Delta Sleep System CD, have achieved commercial success in stores like Barnes & Noble and Time Life. In academia, Dr. Thompson served as a faculty member at the California Institute for Human Science, where he taught courses on behavioral psychoacoustics and clinical neuroacoustic therapy. His patented neuroacoustic vibroacoustic sound chair and table are used in medical and wellness settings globally. Cool. Okay, yeah, what have you been up to?
Well,
I should say, what new things have you come up with?
Yeah, well,
That's more fun.
I was in practice for 41 years, so when I retired in order to spend more time doing projects and research and teaching and managing a network of practitioners I trained this technique to. Now I'm twice as busy as I ever dreamed of being when I was retired. So now I need a retirement from my retirement. But I have, I have a lot of different news feeds that I subscribe to, so I can keep my finger on the pulse of the latest stuff that's happening. Neurology and brain science and quantum physics and the rest of all that. It's just a continuing mind-boggling stream that comes through. I mean, it really is amazing what's going on. I mean, the James Webb Telescope, they shoot this thing up there, and all of a sudden, when they look back further into the past, closer than ever to the Big Bang, right? What do they see? They see ancient nebula and galaxies that should not be there. It takes hundreds of millions of years for infant galaxies to begin to form after the Big Bang cools down. And helium and all the other elements can start to form, and then the next thing you can know, sooner or later you can start to get stars and the rest of that, right? That stuff shouldn't be 300,000 years after the Big Bang.
So are you saying we just know nothing?
Now they realize that the whole deck of cards is once again in the air. The Big Bang is now in question. The Big Bang, as they understand it, couldn't possibly exist the way they tell it, right? Either the universe has got to be hundreds of billions of years older than they think, but the math doesn't add up there, or something else is afoot completely, right? And the same thing in brain science. I mean, just when you think you know everything about the brain, I remember studying this in school, but it's sort of, studying in school, the gray matter on the outside of the noodles of your brain, right? And the white matter, which is cables going in and out that carries information. Well, first they discovered that the cables, the white matter, is stuffed with stuff that affect the neurons directly And now we realize that the neurons on the outer layer are not the whole picture at all, that the white matter itself is participating in, decision making and stuff like that. When I was in school, we learned that there are 6 layers of brain cells in the gray matter. So if you take the gray matter and you look at it, it's got 6 layers of brain cells. And now I understood that, I knew that was true. But now they discovered that each of those 6 layers has its own brainwave activity. So whatever you thought the brainwave activity on an EEG was all about, multiply that by 6.
And
there's 6 brains layered on top of themselves, all communicating with each other in all kinds of different ways. And the gamma brain frequencies are out at the top layer, and the delta frequencies are down at the bottom layer.
And this is not even to mention the relationship of emotions to the physical body, to the spiritual body.
Yeah,
I mean what about the soul? I mean, when are we ever going to get there?
Just keeps going on and on. And so now I've just, the thing I've been doing the last few days is some of the news reports that have been coming through have been showing there's a problem with anesthesia, right? When you give anesthesia to a person and knock them out for surgery, nobody understands at all why that works. There is no scientific research and no micro studies that show how that works at all. And one of the most prominent scientists, Penrose, his idea is that it's not what we thought at all, that the electrical depolarization of the neurons that depolarize and then cause sweeps of large groups of neurons to depolarize at the same time and create a wave that sweeps across the cortex, brain waves, that the electrical spark that comes out of the neuron and goes down the axon, right, to the gap that continues on if the neurotransmitters work properly. That every neuron and every axon is chock full of microtubules. And the microtubules are a crystalline structure, like a crystal. That means they have piezoelectric properties. Piezoelectric properties means that if you take a crystalline structure like a crystal, like this guy, and atomically inside is this lattice work that can bend under pressure. If I put pressure on this crystal, like if I wiggle, if I put pressure on the crystal, I cause the piezoelectric effect with the electrical spark will spark out the top of this thing. It's the old idea when I was a kid of the crystal radio set. You didn't plug in a crystal radio set and had a crystal sticking there with a copper wiring thing with a slider that went across that chose different channels. But the crystal was what's picking up the channels. The crystal was powering the whole thing.
So it really seems like the whole deal is like, is it really sound? Is it electromagnetic? Is it photons? Is it light? Is it the quantum field? I mean, what's the hierarchy there?
What was saying was that that there's a pressure wave. Pressure waves are sound. So there's a pressure wave that comes from the thalamus, and the thalamus is in the center of the brain, 2 big global things that is looked upon as the Grand Central Station. Signals come up from the spinal cord from the body into Grand Central Station, which routes them out into the cortex for finer degrees of discrimination and decisions, right? But no, the thalamus has long been recognized as the origin of brainwaves. The thalamus initiates the depolarization of the neurons further out. And now it appears that the thalamus is creating pressure waves and the pressure waves are hitting the neurons, and that pressure is shifting the water that the neuron is made of, right? The brain is even more made of water than the body. Body is 70%, the brain is 80%. So, and that water is colloidal water. It's balancing on the razor edge of water on the one hand and a liquid crystal on the other side. And a liquid crystal has piezoelectric properties. And all the same thing with all the microtubules. They're crystalline structures, so they lend themselves to electrical depolarization. So if you have a pressure on the neuron, it shifts the water into a liquid crystal, puts pressure on the microtubules, and all of this together generates an electrical spark. The electrical sparks of the neurons and down the axons is a wave of pressure moving down the axon, and at the leading edge of that wave, that pressure is causing piezoelectric discharges all along the line, and that's what we're measuring with EEG, is pressurized liquid crystal discharges from sound waves driving the brain. I mean,
nice. Well, you know, when you say waves, my first thought is that's a musical flow.
It's all based on harmonics and overtones. The waves are speeds, and the speeds of crest to wave are based on mathematics.
You can break it down totally into rhythm and melody and everything, really. Yeah. Okay.
And, it just goes on. That's just scratching the surface.
Yeah. Oh my God. So okay. So we're still on the threshold of a new terrain. So
yeah.
We're gonna. I know after your presentation we're going to want to talk. So tell me what your presentation's about.
The presentation is in one sense, sort of an overview of sound and the ways sound has been used in the past and how it blends into the future, and how we've got high-tech instrumentation that we can use sound in ways that's never been able to be used before. And we've got imaging systems to see what's going on in the brain. So we can take pictures of, you know, places we would love to be able to go in our consciousness reflected in brain waves. And we can measure what it is in like long-term meditators. And then we can entrain you to that same pattern and jumpstart the system and bypass 20 years of sitting on your butt trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. It's a direct, visceral experience, and that's how the system really learns.
Cool.
I mean, when I went to school and I had to memorize all this stuff in the body, memorizing into the rational thinking network in the ordinary brain is the least effective possible way of getting information into a holographic system. Right? It's ridiculous. If you could just like get this out of the way and open the door directly to the system.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's better if you use both, because I remember talking to Richard Feather Anderson. He was saying that the best way to build a sacred geometry building is to use your mind and figure out the overall structure. And then once you got that together, open up to your intuition and let your intuition then learn how to tweak it, because source is not going to figure out the basic number of rooms and places from the beginning. So to actually use
those two
both.
systems definitely work together. I mean, you know, when you have to go through the grunt work of learning music, right? You take music lessons and you learn harmonic theory and you learn music theory and learn how to put your fingers on the keys, and you build up some muscles and you practice and practice and practice until you want to spit. But after a certain point, that muscle memory is networked in your brain. You've grown those pathways. Those pathways are nice and burned. Now you're free to let all that stuff go and allow your muse under the hood to control your fingers and allow the music to just come straight out because you've already burned the pathways to make that happen. That's, to me, how those two systems sort of work together. When I'm looking at all this stuff in the news feeds and I'm reading all this, dense stuff, and I've already got a scaffolding in my brain from having gone to school and having to memorize all this stuff. And I illustrated it, so that helped. But I've got to place a network that I can place this information. And that fleshes it out. And now that I've got all this information there, the big sort of quantum computer under the hood that's constantly crunching numbers and looking for patterns pops up a pattern and shoots it up into my brain. And I have some kind of eureka that goes, oh my God, that fits and that fits and that fits together. And now I understand how blah, blah, I firmly believe that's what intuition is all about, is like
connecting the dots.
Crunching numbers, X plus Z equals Y and such over this, and bang, I get a eureka.
Nice. Okay. So let's go ahead and watch your presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We'll talk on the other side.
So today we're going to talk about the use of sound for expanding consciousness, deepening self-awareness, and accessing higher states of intuition and connection with the universe at large. And we're going to be delving the history a bit in the past that has led to this, the use of sound for accentuating this, and sort of where this is going in the future, and where we currently are at the present moment in the 21st century with high-tech clinical means of using sound in a new sort of format where it hasn't really been used before with this level of precision, a clinical use of sound frequencies that are very precise for healing, and very precise methods of brainwave entrainment to entrain brainwaves for healing and for advanced meditation states. We know that the mystery of sort of what's going on inside that semi-gelatinous 3 pounds of brain that's stuck inside your skull, quantum physics in the present day, when you read these latest research in quantum physics about the nature of reality, and if you're familiar at all with the ancient texts in Sanskrit from 4,000 years ago that describe reality, these could be sort of quantum physicists in Tibetan robes talking about the same stuff. It's so similar that it's sort of hair-raising, to realize that, yes, my body is made of 2 cells. My body is made of cells, and the cells are made of chemical compounds, and the compounds are made of atoms. And the atoms represent the smallest measurable particle of a substance that can be measured. So, for instance, the smallest particle of gold would be a gold atom on the periodic table. And so now we see that the atoms can form themselves into certain kind of configurations that form all the different types of elements that get combined together into compounds to make you and me and everything else around us. But once you go beyond the periodic table, that's what I call the wall that separates this sort of Newtonian universe of things that have objective reality and the quantum world, where none of the laws that normally work here work at all in that world. As a matter of fact, everything is Alice in Wonderland inside out and backwards. It's sort of like stepping through the looking glass of the periodic table, the wall between these two worlds. Because once you go below the level of an atomic structure, say of gold, you've just got protons, electrons, and neutrons. And then when you start to penetrate inside those to see what they're made of, first of all, you realize that what you thought was, say, a proton in the nucleus of an atom is actually a resonating field that's in constant motion with huge amounts of energy. And it doesn't actually have a boundary. The closer you penetrate into it, the more you realize that it's made of smaller things. And that's where you get the concept of quarks and charms and things like that, that we in themselves are not solid either. They're fields of vibration in a state of energetic motion. And when you penetrate inside that field, you find other knots of energy that you put new names on. So we've got quarks and charms and hadrons and leptons. And as you split things further and further and find out what they're made of, and you find out those aren't solid either, they're fields of energy, eventually you sort of crack the smallest little field of energy open, and inside there's no more. There's nothing there. It's an infinite field of vibrational frequencies of every possible kind, resonating and forming standing wave patterns in a substance that cannot be measured. So it used to be called a vacuum. Before that, it was called the ether, which was a substance. And now we're back to the ether, except we call it dark matter and dark energy. There is a substance at the base root of all reality in the quantum field that is an invisible substance that can't be measured, that is in a state of infinite resonance of every possible frequency that you could imagine, all interacting together, forming standing waves, like the sand patterns on the Chladni plate, where you put sound waves through a metal plate with sand on top and it forms these patterns. Every frequency forms a different pattern. And if you have an infinite number of frequencies forming an infinite number of patterns that are all interacting, those patterns begin to stack together, layer on layer and layer, as you sort of zoom back from the quantum field, where you zoom back far enough, it looks like a lepton, and you zoom back far enough, and the leptons assemble together and look like, a quark, and you zoom far enough back, and the quarks assemble together and look like a proton, and you zoom far enough back, and you've got a person. So in reality, even though this appears to be solid and all of this appears to be solid, we all sort of understand just from high school physics that none of this is solid and none of it is real, and most of it is 99.999% space between atoms. At the core of it all is nested standing waves, almost an incalculable number of layers of intertwined stacked standing waves, forming a larger pattern that looks like me, or a lamp, or a book, or something. And for a person, the core of that energy field pattern at a quantum field is a unique frequency that makes me unique. It's my fundamental resonance arising out of the quantum field as a representative of a certain possibility of a thing, a me thing, that will never be repeated again and has never happened in the universe in the past. So I'm a unique event in the universe, and all of the standing waves that stack together to make me look like what I am nest themselves together in mathematical ways that we describe as music theory. The same music theory that governs the keys on the piano behind me back there. The concept of octaves and harmonics and overtones, which give the flavor, the timbre of me. Represented in all of my tissues and represented in my vocal cords. So the sound of me as I speak to you right now is because of the resonance characteristics of the standing waves that make the tissue mass of my vocal cords as I blow wind across them, and you get the sound of the voice of Jeffrey. You can do a spectral analysis of that voice, and you can see all the harmonics and overtones that make the fingerprint of my resonance characteristics that is unique to me, just like the fingerprint on my finger. It's how the government can tell who's on a cell phone from a satellite. Voice print analysis, which hints at the true unimaginable power of my voice to heal me, or my voice to raise me into the highest state of consciousness I can become, because there's something deeply recognizable about me Om chanting to myself in a certain tone. If I could find that tone of me, I would resonate myself right down to my core of my consciousness, like a wine glass with a frequency. And now we have the tools and technologies to find out what that frequency might be. In the past, you would go to find the great master who could see that you were a frequency and sing that frequency to you, and you would go into your cave and you would meditate and chant this frequency to yourself and resonate yourself like a wine glass to the core of your consciousness. And you would clothe that chant in the Sanskrit syllable that was derived from your Vedic astrology chart, which represented the sort of archetype of your highest form, your highest personality that you could be. The masters have all retired, and we don't know where they are anymore. And there's no one there to give you your personal mantra tone anymore. So all we've got left is the Vedic astrology chart and the Sanskrit syllable, which we are told that we're supposed to hold silently in our mind. And it's my opinion that that was never the way it was, that I would physically chant that, resonate myself like a wine glass with a key frequency clothed in the Sanskrit syllable that pointed me to my highest archetype. And be that as it may, we can measure what's going on inside the brain with advanced brain mapping EEG computers. We can map what's going on inside the nervous system. Under the hood is the autonomic nervous system that controls all my systems and all my organs and glands and all my systems on automatic without me knowing what's going on down here. Two separate systems. The autonomic system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, is the automated biocomputer program that tells all systems what to do and just kind of runs itself in automatic all the time. And if something goes awry there and I start to get sick, it's a big mystery to me up here, and I have to drag myself off to some expert who's got a white lab coat who then prescribes some kind of a pill to me. This is all new upstart whippersnappers since the 1920s, when all healing in all of history, in every culture on earth before that, was holistic approaches, rebalancing energy fields and rebalancing stress levels and rebalancing body chemistry in a holistic way to remove the blockages of the natural healing qualities that should be operating all the time that for some reason aren't working and are blocked for some reason. So basically the holistic approach was to unblock what's blocking the natural expression of the healing impulse. So now we've got these fancy schmancy EEG machines, and at the one end, we can measure people who might have some kind of problem with their brain function, where the brainwave activity in the brain is not working properly for some reason. And we can use a clinical version of brainwave entrainment to reestablish a normal pattern in the brain. This is way beyond the normal kind of uses that you see of brainwave entrainment with a generalized sort of relaxation or meditation soundtrack. This is all highly specific of exact brainwave frequency entrainment for a brain that we can see on an EEG, and we can watch it respond and normalize. At the other end of that spectrum are monks who've been meditating for 30 years who can go into these extremely high states of meditation that we want to be able to go to. And we can look inside their brains and see what pattern of brain activity is going on in a high state meditator's brain. And once we can establish what the brain looks like when it's in these extremely high states, then we can use brainwave entrainment to entrain your brain to that exact pattern. So sort of like high-tech 21st century training wheels for advanced meditation states, so that we can jumpstart the system and take the brain to a gym and muscle up my self-awareness or my expansion of consciousness, cosmic consciousness, without having to sort of sit on my butt for 30 years to figure out what I'm supposed to do the long way. That's where it's all been going for quite a while now. So advanced brain mapping computers can, look at a normal brain and see if it's abnormal and retrain it back to a normal pattern. But all kinds of different states that we might be able to measure. And in some of those states, we would want to entrain your brain waves to those states to induce a certain state of consciousness through technological means like training wheels. Now, back in the 60s, there was an EEG researcher called C. Maxwell Cade that saw this particular pattern of 15 levels of brain frequencies from beta up here at the top down to delta at the bottom, where the right and left hemispheres were in sync with each other, and the maximum amplitudes were in alpha and theta, and this was called the awakened mind pattern. He was hooking up advanced meditators from all over the world to EEG to see what does enlightenment look like. And he saw this pattern show up so many times, he called it the awakened mind pattern. I created a soundtrack that reproduced this called the awakened mind back in the late 90s. 15 layers of binaural beats in this configuration to reproduce this brain pattern as an entrainment soundtrack. This idea that the magic of this most amazing structure in the universe, and the fact that it can be processed self-awareness and cosmic consciousness, and that we can hook meditators up to see what that looks like and then entrain your brainwaves to that pattern, is a pretty remarkable thing to even say. You've got to be careful. There is such a thing as overdose. In the realm of sound healing and holistic healing, dosage is sort of everything. It's just, there you go. So it's a homeopathic principle. You can take something like belladonna, that's normally a poison in its full strength, and take a homeopathic dose of that, and now it's therapeutic. Everybody needs water to survive, but you can drown. So dosage is sort of everything. And in the world of sound, dosage is how loud and how long. So the earliest examples of brainwave entrainment has been established most likely as shamanic drumming practices. I've done extensive research into this myself. You can take recordings of shamans doing a ceremony to transform consciousness. And you can take that back to the lab and you can measure it up, and you can see that what brain frequencies are happening in this drum beat. So in order to get myself in character here, I've got to like put my hat on. So because I just happen to have one of these drums here. So if I start pounding this drum, hey, 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 that's about right. And that is about 5 hertz. 5 cycles per second drum beat. And just about all of the measurements that I've taken of shamanic drums being pounded are someplace in that theta brainwave range. Theta is where you go when you're dreaming, and it's also where you go when you're creative and where you go on a shamanic journey. So there's this concept of that I'm putting you from an awaking state, and your brainwaves are slowing down to match this drum beat at, say, 5 hertz, which is usually deep theta in a dream state. I'm putting you into a dream state without going to sleep. So that's a classic definition of a trance state. And a trance state is very close to a shamanic journey state. So all of this is kind of wrapped up together depending on context. But what it means is that we can pound these drums intuitively into a theta state where I go into a sort of a dreamlike state, a trance state, and go on a shamanic journey. Cultures from, say, Tibet, who came up with these bowls and tinshas and bells. These bowls are alloys, mostly bronze or brass. I spent a certain amount of my time in the past as a sculptor using molten metal and molds. So I became an expert mold maker, and I became an expert metalsmith, making my own alloys. So I'm very familiar with how a slightest tweak of a percentage point of a certain element in a mix can change all the characteristics. So the magic of a Tibetan bowl like this one, made of bronze, you can tell by the color, is about 97% copper and 3% tin. It's actually 2.75% tin and a little bit of antimony or maybe bismuth. It depends on which it is. And by changing those a little bit, you change the quality of the characteristic of the sound. What that sound sounds like. So something about that tone centers you, but inside the tone there's a wah-wah. Wah-wah, 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 wah-wah. And that wah-wah is a brainwave frequency that is derived from the curvature of the bowl. So the diameter down here is less than the diameter up here, so we've got 2 tones that are interacting. That's essentially a binaural beat. 2 tones interacting slightly out of tune creates a pulse, and if they're untuned just right, the pulse is a brainwave speed. The secret of the bowls is the tone and the pulse. You can tell a good bowl from a bad bowl. The idea of the modern use of brainwave entrainment dates back to this article that came out in 1973, Auditory Beats in the Brain by Gerald Oster. He's the one that invented binaural beats. 2 sine waves slightly out of tune, creating a pulse between them. And if you tune them just right, the pulse is a brainwave speed and causes your brainwaves to entrain to that. So if I've got 2 speakers going with 100 hertz and 105 hertz, I have a 5 cycle a second pulsing in the air molecules between these 2 speakers. Sort of a science thing. My brainwaves will entrain to that pulse. His next question in this article was, what if the pulse was truly sort of a phantom pulse, and we do it with headphones. So now we've got 100 hertz and 105, and I hear a 5 cycle a second pulsing in the middle of my head, and my brainwaves will then train to that, just like the shamanic drum beat, a 5 hertz theta, and my consciousness will transform. But the problem is, where is the pulse coming from? Because there's no air molecules between these two speakers. There's a brain. So it means now that I'm forcing the brain into exhibiting a true quirk of neurophysiology, which is that this hemisphere and this hemisphere are comparing notes to find out what's going on here, because there's never a time when one ear would hear something that the other one doesn't hear in all of our biological history. So now this ear is hearing something that one's not hearing, and vice versa at the same time. And my brain is comparing notes and manufacturing this pulse that I'm hearing out of nowhere. And then I'm in training to a pulse that I'm creating out of nowhere. So this is very powerful, because it means we get two things. We get entrainment to a phantom pulse that I'm creating. So it's an active brainwave entrainment process as opposed to passive with speakers. And number two, I'm getting synchronicity of the hemispheres, which is in itself a big thing, right? Synchronicity of the hemispheres is when the aha moment, the doors open up to higher levels of information and processing. It's the spiritual revelation. It's the new brilliant idea that comes from nowhere. It's a new level of access to problem solving and things like that, lateral out of the box thinking. And if you listen to a soundtrack that does this all the time, you're exercising that function in a gym for your brain. Very powerful stuff. There's never been a time in all of our human history where we could cause synchronicity of the hemispheres at will with some kind of technological solution that would require advanced audio processing and headphones. So essentially, when you've got the two speakers, 100, 105, you've got a crossover zone, a sweet spot that you'll hear this 5 cycle a second pulse. The brain is way more complex than that, because there's all kinds of planes of communication within the hemispheres. When you do an EEG brain mapping computer session, you can see all these different pathways of communication. So when I was doing clinical work with these kind of devices, and we could see that there was a plane of communication from here over to here that was not working, then we could position in three-dimensional space the binaural beats, one tone here and one tone here, and train this function back and see it work on a brain mapping computer. This is advanced binaural beat clinical work. But all the traditions of using sound as a tool in almost all the cultures as a spiritual expansion method. And here's the example of the different diameters in a bowl that create different tones. And in the tinshas as well, right? We've got a small bell and a large bell, and the large bell and the large bell interact, the small bell and the small bell interact, and the large and the small and the large and the small. We have a pattern of brainwaves like the awakened mind pattern. So just when I think that I've, surrounded by fancy schmancy equipment and measuring people's brainwaves and all this advanced stuff, I find out that the Tibetans did it 3,000 years ago already. They already figured the whole thing out. All of this is based on the law of coupled oscillators. Here's another article in Scientific American in 1973, Coupled Oscillators and Biological Synchronicity. The concept of coupled oscillators is underpinning of the whole idea of brainwave entrainment and the whole idea of why a wine glass vibrates when you sing the right note. Things want to resonate together in the universe to save energy. So I've got bioclocks that time my circadian rhythms to rhythms in the universe. And so if I put headphones on and have rhythms, then my brain, thinks that's the most dominant rhythm to entrain to. Christian Huygens is the one who invented this whole idea, who discovered it, not invented it, but discovered it by inventing the pendulum clock and seeing that the pendulums were swinging together when they were attached to the same wall. And they became random if you put them on different walls. Turns out that the wall itself was acting like a sounding board, carrying the subtle vibrations of the gears from one clock to the other to synchronize these up as a coupled oscillator pair. Now, at one point, I was contacted by representatives that worked with NASA and JPL who gave me these space sounds from the Voyager 1 and 2 program. And those are basically interactions between the solar wind, charged particles from the solar wind impacting ions in the ionosphere of the Earth and making them vibrate. And they're vibrating exactly within the range of human hearing. And so first I want to play this. Let me get this. First of all, I want to play a sample of digital recordings of Tibetan bowls put in an electronic keyboard where you can control the speed of the recording and drop the recording by octaves or harmonics, and you can play a Tibetan bowl symphony if you want. So what you're going to hear is a 6-inch bowl that's been slowed down to various stages and played like a Tibetan bowl symphony. This is enhanced if you've got headphones on, because some of these tones are pretty low, and if you're watching on a laptop, you're not going to hear much from the low frequencies. So headphones is a good thing to have right now. So here we go. Pretty sort of mind-blowing what you can do with that. So now let's listen to this recording that came back from the rings of Uranus. Uranus is, by the way, the only planet that's sitting on its side with its rings vertical. It's a gas planet. And so this is the interaction of the solar wind striking the ionosphere of the rings of Uranus. So here we go with that. I don't know about you, but does that sound like Tibetan bowls to anybody? Coming from space? You know, it's all part of an idea called primordial sounds. Sounds that have a deep meaning at a deep unconscious level, a primordial recognition at an unconscious level of certain types of sounds. Examples would be womb sounds and certain nature sounds that are slowed down in ways that only the unconscious can recognize it. In 1988, when I first moved to California and opened up my big research center and my clinic, I was given an EEG machine from a company in Holland to evaluate. So I got an EEG for free, and this EEG was different than anything else out there because it was the first EEG machine that could plug into your home computer instead of buying a $30,000 dedicated EEG sort of suite thing they had to buy. I did a 2-year project of hooking every patient up to this EEG machine to prove to myself the concept of brain entrainment and synchronicity of the hemispheres. And in that process, I saw certain people's brainwaves that I was entraining to deep delta, the slowest brain frequency. You know, back in those days, beta, alpha, theta, delta, the 4 bandwidths of brainwave frequencies, each associated with different brainwave speed, right? Depolarization of the neurons that depolarize in huge groups of neurons that sweep across the cortex in waves of depolarization. That's why it's called brain waves. And the speed of those depolarizations sweeping across the brain somehow is deeply associated with different states of consciousness. So if it's 13 to 35, you know, sweeps per second, it's beta. And if it's 7 to about 13, it's alpha. So it's 13 down to 7 is alpha, 7 down to about 4 is theta, and 4 down to 0.5 is delta. Delta is where you go in deepest sleep for physical recuperation. And I was seeing brainwave frequencies showing up that were below delta, which aren't supposed to exist. And then I did and then when a person came up on the table afterwards, they had these amazing stories of out-of-the-body experiences. I called this brain frequency epsilon eventually. I did a big study to find, is anybody reporting below delta brain activity? No. Later, I was to find out when I was doing these advanced EEG studies with neurofeedback practitioners and asked them, have you ever seen below delta activity? And they said no, but we wouldn't be able to because these expensive $30,000 devices don't show below 1 hertz. So they're so convinced that the bandwidth from beta, alpha, theta, delta is all there is that they make their machine so they can't see outside that box. So they couldn't have discovered it even if they were looking for it. And because I had an EEG machine sent to me with no box, then I could see all these other frequencies, like frequencies below delta. So in 1989, I discovered this new brain frequency below delta. I called it epsilon, and it's associated with all kinds of metaphysical experiences like out-of-the-body experiences and precognitive experiences, spiritual insights, epiphanies, things like that. Back in the late 80s, there was another brainwave frequency that was discovered above beta. Now, the highest level of beta at that time was 30 to 35 hertz, and this was 40 hertz. And a funny thing about brainwaves that the slower the brainwaves are, the larger the amplitude, and the faster they go, the smaller the amplitude. It's sort of like because the brain, if it wants to make 30 of them, then it's dividing the same energy to make 30, so the amplitude is low. But if I only have to make 3, then each of them has a large amplitude because that's where the energy is going. So the 40 hertz that they discovered in the late 80s, that they called gamma, they could only discover it by during open brain surgery. Actually, I have a photograph of that, so if you're squeamish, don't look. This is the actual photograph of when they discovered gamma, where the EEG electrodes are right on the brain, so they could pick up these extremely low amplitude brain activities that normally can't penetrate through the skull, because the skull is 1/4 of an inch thick. They discovered gamma at 40 hertz. They also discovered 100 hertz and 200 hertz, but there was never any more research done with these two. I eventually named them hypergamma and lambda because nobody ever put a name on them, because I started using those in my clinical practice. The Dalai Lama did a research project in 2001 with some of his longest-term meditators who had been meditating for 30 years, hooking them up to these advanced EEG devices, fMRI machines, heart rate variability monitors, and stuff like that. And what did they find? They found massive amplitudes of gamma brain activity with that particular type of meditation. And it turns out that every different type of meditation that has come from different countries that all look different and have different names, each of them forms a different brainwave state, but all those brainwave states all lead to the same sort of superconscious experience. So it's sort of like there's a big God room with a bunch of doors, and each door is a different meditation technique from a different culture with a different name and a different brain state associated with it, but they all lead to the same room. Now, one of those doors, one of those techniques, one of those technologies, one of those meditation types of practice is tailor-made for your brain and your nervous system, but you wouldn't know which one it is unless you tried them all. It's a crapshoot whether the religion you were born into is the right door for you. You wouldn't know it unless you had access to all the different ones to try them all, and that's pretty much what we provide with this technology we've got called biotuning, where we can find this fundamental frequency, calculate all these different brainwave frequencies from that as octaves that are now very precise for you, and we can nail exactly what your gamma frequency is that opens the door for you. And then we can let you try every single brainwave frequency as an entrainment program to find out which one of them really unlocks your door for your highest state of meditation. We currently recognize 21 different brain states, which is way beyond what the general EEG classifications are, which are still stuck with beta, alpha, theta, and delta. At least 50% of them now are including gamma. So now it's the big five for most of the nomenclature. Nobody is recognizing what I discovered as epsilon. In 2001, they discovered the default mode network, which is even slower than the epsilon that I found. But this one isn't included in the big four either. Now it's the big five. It should be the big six. It should be the big seven. We've broken ground in all these realms, including the discovery of these borderline brain states. The state between beta and alpha is in itself a brain state. And all of this work has come out of PubMed articles and peer-reviewed journals that have shown, for instance, there was one of my news feeds showed latest discoveries of a big project with high IQ prodigy kids who have IQ of 180 and above. They did, advanced EEG studies to find out, hey, what's going on in their brains? Is there something different? And the answer is yes. The difference is those kids tend to have a lot of high-level brain activity at the borderline between beta and alpha. And so the borderline between beta and alpha is now this beta-alpha bridge state is now recognized as being associated with high IQ. That means that if we entrain your brain waves to the borderline of where your brain goes between alpha and theta, which we can calculate from finding your fundamental frequency. We can theoretically boost your IQ by entraining you here. The alpha theta bridge, somewhere between 7 and 8 hertz, depending on which textbook you read, is where the Schumann resonance is. It's also where the flow state is, borderline state between alpha theta. Theta delta, this is the bridge state between, this is where access to long-term memory happens. Delta epsilon is the borderline state between the physical and the metaphysical. This is where you start to understand the metaphysical meanings for your physical symptoms and things like that. The fact that reality as it appears is a metaphor for some kind of underlying quantum process. And down here is our latest research experimental zones of iota 1 and 2, which is slower than default mode. Default mode network is one brain pulse every 10 to 20 seconds. And so we're making iota every 20 to 40 seconds, iota 2 every 40 to 80 seconds. And it turns out that my news feeds show that all around the world, just a couple of years ago, was reported an earth pulse, one pulse every 26 seconds that nobody knows where it's coming from. And one pulse every 26 seconds is right in the iota 1 brainwave range that we have been experimenting with now for 15 years. This is one pulse every 20 to 40 seconds. One pulse every 26 seconds, as reported in these news reports, is an iota frequency. So brain frequencies that slow is me entraining to the Earth's biome, all living creatures on the Earth that I'm part of. So I mentioned the default mode network is these 4 zones in the brain. One zone is in the frontal area, one's in the occipital area, one is in the right-left parietal temporal zones, and they're all highly synchronized together. These 4 zones are synchronized together. And the default mode represents the default mode function of the brain. 95% of all brain function is the default mode. 5% off the top is you and me having this conversation. Everything that you have considered to be your whole life of your cognitive experience being here in the world is only 5% off the top. 95% is the default mode where these 4 zones are all synchronized up. What's going on down there? Wool gathering, mind wandering, consolidation of information, pruning of excess information we don't need anymore. I believe it's the quantum computer that generates reality in the next moment from now. Research report after research report started coming in showing that hypersynchronizing of these 4 zones is associated with super states of meditation. When the 4 zones come unsynchronized, it's every neurological condition you've ever heard of: ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, Parkinson's, depression, PTSD, autism, epilepsy. All of those have a default mode network unsynchronizing problem. So if you could use brainwave entrainment to resynchronize the 4 zones by rotating 2 of the binaural beats in 3-dimensional space and having 4 to then all of a sudden you've got a clinical tool of brainwave entrainment to help those conditions. However, if you are now creating a soundtrack, a default mode network soundtrack to resynchronize those 4 zones, and you don't have any kind of problem with your synchronicity, and you're hypersynchronizing the 4 zones, what does that mean? And that's where these articles started coming in. Meditation experience associated with differences in default mode network activity and connectivity, hyper-connecting the 4 zones associated with high states of meditation. Non-directive meditation activities, default mode network, and areas associated with memory retrieval and emotional processing. Psychology today, mind wandering and mindfulness. We're talking about scientific mindfulness. Putting the brain in the state it goes to in its highest possible states. Increased default mode network connectivity associated with meditation. Meditation neuroplasticity, the new default mode. Transcendental meditation activates default mode network. Impact of meditation training on the default mode network during a resting state. Article after article after article pointing to that this default mode accentuated and hypersynchronized is access to what some people described as cosmic consciousness. My sense of self inside my skin, my sense of self outside my skin, my sense of self in time and space. So if I synchronize my sense of self inside my skin with the sense of self on the outside of my skin, I synchronize those, it gives me my normal sense of here, where I am in space. And these two, sense of time, all my past memories, and then extrapolating into the future, synchronize those up and get my sense of the present moment. If I start hypersynchronizing those, the edges become fuzzy. I can no longer tell where the edge of my inside of my body is. It appears to be universally large. That's cosmic consciousness. Or my sense of the present begins to expand into all past and future events. That's cosmic consciousness in time. My new sense of time and space. Now, how we get this neural code to tap the system. Here's the autonomic nervous system with sympathetic and parasympathetic. That's the system that governs all my body processes and handles stress. It all issues from a little tiny area in your brain called the hypothalamus. Inside the hypothalamus are these little organelles. They've all got fancy names. The anterior hypothalamic nucleus, this one right here, is the origin of the parasympathetic nervous system. The posterior hypothalamus nucleus is the origin of the sympathetic nervous system. We can resonate this like a wine glass with a precisely tuned sound frequency and force the sympathetic parasympathetic to go into a state of balance. For instance, here's the anterior nucleus, stimulates parasympathetic. Here's the posterior nucleus, stimulates sympathetic. This all comes out as the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is the parasympathetic, or innervates all the organs. The vagus nerve drives the system, controls the system. If I can control the vagus nerve, I can control the autonomic nervous system. How you evaluate the autonomic nervous system is a gold standard in modern medicine called heart rate variability. We have a patented version of heart rate variability that's the most advanced in the world. It's real time, where I can see the sympathetic parasympathetic live on my computer screen. HRV is measuring the space between each heartbeat, and that gives you high HRV versus low HRV, or whether you're relaxed or under stress. But this advanced version using EKG, so this would be the Fitbit or an Oura Ring. This is the medical version of EKG attached to your chest or on your wrist, measuring the electrical activity. And it's measuring resonance, vibrational fields in the heart electrical activity. And those bandwidths in hertz are displayed here in the standard medical version of HRV. Each of these bandwidths is frequency bandwidths in the heart information. The blue one is sympathetic, green one is parasympathetic, and we're looking for the 0 point of zero stress in the system. Homeostasis, where the two of these are balanced, and I'm not fighting for my life with sympathetic or digesting my food with parasympathetic. I can use a sound wave to make this happen. And that sound wave is accurate to a few decimal points. And if I expose you to it, this happens. And this is a prerequisite to being able to meditate. Your survival needs must be met. The reservoir must be full. You must not be using the energy for this purpose or this purpose. It must be this purpose. Zero stress, my safe place. If I can't achieve this, I'm sick. Right? Scientific community and the medical community around the world recognize that stress is the cause of disease, which is an imbalance at the autonomic level. We can hook you up, lay you back, and see if this is functioning normally. And if it's not, we can find a precise frequency that makes this happen. This is a clinical use, sort of a 21st century high-tech clinical use of sound to put your body in the position it must be in for healing to take place. Then the internal physician program can come back online and work on this list and untangle this problem from the inside out. Healing doesn't come from me. Healing doesn't come from some pill. Healing comes from inside me. And when I'm in a state of imbalance and compromised health, it's because the autonomic nervous system is stuck in sympathetic on mode and it can't get out of it. I can't achieve homeostasis. With this method, we can use HRV to tell us what frequency pushes the reset button. And then we can let the system take care of itself. When we expose you to that sound and various octaves of that sound in a session, the sympathetic parasympathetic start to skate back and forth across this balance point, and this is what homeostasis looks like in a living subject. An oscillation begins to appear in the sympathetic parasympathetic, just like the Ida and Pingala and the Sushumna that form the caduceus, and each crossover point forms a chakra from the ancient texts. So if the frequency that we find for you is 266.24 hertz, or C plus 30 cents, because we can tune between C and C sharp, by 100 steps with the digital readout, we're going to calculate all the octaves of this, and here they all are. And anything that is below 20 hertz, lowest range of hearing, are brainwave frequencies. So these brain frequencies are exact to a couple of decimal points, exact states of consciousness hardwired into the brain and nervous system that unlock a program that causes homeostasis to happen in the autonomic. And this brings together brainwave states in the brain and frequency bandwidths in the heart. Brain, heart are now linked together by music theory, octaves and harmonics. Because these brain states are octaves of this frequency that causes homeostasis to happen in the autonomic nervous system and unlocks the healing program and sets me up to the prerequisite for being able to meditate. We'll calculate all these out, and then we'll expose you to each and every one of these in a separate program and take each one of these to the gym, clean it up, run its program, make sure it's running fine, and methodically go through every brain state that we can identify and clean your system out. It also means that we've identified the exact brain frequency in epsilon that allows you to access metaphysical abilities like precognition, intuition, out of the body, that is hardwired in your brain. We deliver that through a sound chair, a sound table that's split right-left, like headphones for the body. Because remember, when we've got binaural beats in headphones, we cause synchronicity. So if those same right-left is in your body right-left, it means that we've got one frequency here and one here in the right-left spinal cords that cause this to happen in the neurons in the brainstem that govern vibration sense in my body. And now we've got this here, and this here, and this here by default. We're resynchronizing up the system to make it much more healthy and balanced, the way the body is trying to do all the time on its own. Essentially, we've got synchronizing up visual, auditory, kinesthetic, because in the past we've had these light glasses that are driven by the sound, not separate programs. You're seeing what you're hearing, what you're feeling. The sound table, sound chair is right, left stereo separation, the same as the eyes, the same as the ears. The binaural beats are causing synchronization of all these systems. The three primary sensory zones of the brain in, say, NLP. So there's powers of numbers. So we can take a whole bunch of different people, and if all those people are listening to a brainwave entrainment soundtrack, then we are synchronizing everybody's brainwaves exactly and precisely into the same state of consciousness together. And we form a massive couple oscillator network where our consciousnesses all weave together and we become one quantum consciousness entity that now has the power, like the 100th monkey idea, to access higher dimensions of information and influence of the universe through the power of numbers. This is an ancient idea, by the way. Human beings have been gathering together minimum numbers, quantum numbers of people of consciousness together to open these doorways. It's what, the Christ and the 12 disciples and Zoroaster and the 12 disciples and Muhammad and the 12 disciples, this 12 number is important. And anything above that is cream. And right now we've got a whole lot of people that are watching this broadcast. And so I am recommending that we do now a short global mind link between all of our brainwaves into exactly the same state. And the state that I'm going to use in the brainwave entrainment soundtrack is the default mode network, synchronizing up the 4 zones for the group mind to open the highest dimensional doorway that so far my news feeds have shown, cosmic consciousness in time and space. This soundtrack lasts for about 7 minutes, so it's much better with headphones. So thank you for being with me so far. Get settled, take a big breath. This is going to be a 7-minute soundtrack. And here we go. Thank you all for being here with me today. That soundtrack that you just heard was called Beyond, Entrainment to the Default Mode Network, Beyond. You can find it on my website called scientificsounds.com. Go to the sound store. It's in the meditation section. I do a live stream broadcast every Sunday where I do a mind link at the end. We have quite a number of people all over the world that listen to that every Sunday at 12:30. Go to YouTube, type in the search Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, and you will see. Thank you all very much again. Blessings.
Excellent. You know, you're just like on the cutting edge of what can be done with the brain, really. And it's really, I just honor you. I mean, the work you've done and the work you're continuing to do, because it's like, you know, it's like a whole lifetime of putting it all together. And now the magic is really happening for the most part.
Yeah, I don't know. My brain is constantly being blown. I mean, it's the happiest thing that can happen to somebody. I mean, that's my favorite thing to happen, is to have my mind blown. And then the second most favorite thing is to blow other people's minds with that information so they can have the same experience I had.
Cool. Okay, so I got a couple of questions from the beginning. You know, I interviewed Bruce Lipton just in the last conference. And when you were talking about zooming into the atom, well, Bruce was saying, you know, inside the atom, there's actually vortexes.
Yes.
And he said there's actually a device that can measure those vortexes.
Oh, what's that?
I know, I don't remember now. It was like 6 months ago.
Well, come on.
Well, yeah, it was like a light microscope, you know, a light type microscope.
Well, there is there's a magnetic imaging.
Okay.
There's, I can't remember, what is it called? Magnetron or something. And there's EEG that's electrical. And then there's something called the squid device that goes down over your head, but it's got another medical term to it. It's a magnetotheraton or something that measures the magnetic fields that arise from the electrical activity. And that gives us that kind of view, at least in one sense.
Well, you know, my concept in my book is that everything is music. It's made of frequencies or pitches, bunch of frequencies as a timbre, the relationships, a musical interval, and then there's musical flow. So I thought, okay, how can we measure the spin of this vortex? Because it's got a specific speed, and that must be really important, right? How many times, how fast does it take to do one rotation? Right?
Yeah.
And how big is the vortex? I mean, there's like some really basic musical information there that seems really important.
Well, when we reference somebody like Nassim Haramein, where the Schwarzschild proton, where the protons in the center of each atom is a black hole. That means that the universe is populated with all kinds of sizes and dimensions of black hole as just part of reality. That if every atom in your body has got a black hole in the middle,
and reality's going in and out of that.
Have spin, and spin has Hawking radiation and all this kind of stuff of information going in and out of a black hole. And then we have this phenomenon of entanglement, where an atom, once you and I have a conversation and we come in contact with each other, we're now linked together forever. We could shoot you to the other side of the universe, and our brain and our atoms are entangled because we've been in contact. But this property, the idea that an atom on the other side of the universe entangled to this atom, that anything that you see happening here, you know is happening there. And if I manipulate this one and make this happen, I know at the other end of the universe this is happening in sync with that.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to an old treatise I wrote. I saw in a book called Einstein Doesn't Live Here Anymore. It's a little tiny book, and that described the same kind of thing, that the proton in the center of an atom is a black hole, but it's not just a black hole, it's a wormhole. And the other end of the wormhole is the electron. So they would have opposite charges, and whatever one is doing, the other one's doing exactly the opposite, in sync, right? So there's no reason to believe that the atom as a whole couldn't be linked through wormhole connections to every other atom in the universe that it comes in contact with and establishes. You've got two black holes, and when they come close enough and get in contact, they form a connection, a wormhole, and now they're connected forever, no matter what distance it is. Wormhole is outside of time and space, right? So
now you said that at that core, there's a frequency that you said could be me. And I thought, when I hear that, I'm like, your soul. That's your soul frequency.
Yeah,
but your soul can be a frequency. It can be a timbre. It can be a song.
Exactly. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. This idea
that seems like where it's going. It's like, how does this? Okay, so there's really two levels here. I mean, and I've been reading Alice Bailey for like 15 years, so there's a lot of concepts from those books. I mean, she says, there's the soul, which is our essence, and then there's the spirit enlivening energy that is just life, right? And she said that the actual life energy comes into the body through the bloodstream. And the consciousness, which is a different energy, comes through the nervous system.
The bloodstream. That's an odd one I'll have to think about.
Because if if your heart stops or you lose all your blood, you're dead. And so that's the spirit, right?
Yeah, there is a thing just in standard physiology. So we know that the brain and the spinal cord and nerve roots, those nerve roots go out and they get smaller and smaller until they're microscopic. Teledendria is what that's called. And there is a flow of ions moving through those nerves. They're electrical. High school physics tells us that it's electromagnetism. You can't have one without the other. As soon as you've got electricity moving through a wire, you've got a magnetic field at right angles. So that's a biomagnetic field. You got a second one in the meridians as chi flows. Chi is electromagnetic as well. You can measure it with a skin resistance meter. That means we have a second system of circulating ions with a second magnetic field at right angles. Then we've got the blood populated with iron particles inside of hemoglobin, because iron has a super affinity to oxygen, and we're trying to get oxygen circulating around. Iron is the only element of the periodic table except for the rare earths over in this little corner. Iron is the only element that has magnetic properties, and the only thing you can make a magnet out of. So when high school physics, if you got a magnet in motion, it generates an electrical field. That means that all of the blood circulating throughout all of your body is creating electrical field.
Which is syncing up with the nervous system frequencies as well.
It's mingling with the magnetic fields and creating a new electromagnetic interface in my sort of biofield. And so that means that if there's an electrical field sticking out, then that electrical field is being influenced by electrical fields in the world. Like, for instance, the Schumann resonance, The Schumann resonance probably has an ability to influence brainwave activity directly, but it certainly is influencing the electrical field and the electromagnetic field of my body.
Can we do a little detour on this? Because this is a question I had, and it's a perfect time to ask it. The Schumann resonance is an archetypal frequency. It's everybody responds to it, right? It's good for your heart in research project I've seen, or research they've done. But what if, and then you've got your own frequency, which is your metabolism and everything you measure, is your whole thing, right? What if the Schumann resonance is a dissonant musical interval with yours? And so that makes me think, where does the Schumann resonance travel through the body separate than yours? Or because if it mingles, that dissonance, see, you would think that would be a problem. Whereas like if I'm a B flat, I mean, I'm like, it's party time, right? Because it's a Schumann resonance.
No, that's not how I look at it, though.
Okay.
Well, first of all, the Schumann resonance is electromagnetic discharges from lightning strikes around the planet. So at any given moment, there's 50,000 lightning strikes per second, filling up the ionosphere. So you've got the ionosphere up here and the surface of the Earth down here. All those lightning strikes are getting electromagnetic energy trapped in that space.
Space, right.
And the electricity is bouncing off the Earth and off the inner surface of the ionosphere like a mirror, and is trapped there. And the distance versus speed of electrical discharge equals 7.83 hertz. However, it's not just 7.83 hertz, that's all of his harmonics, at least 6 harmonics that have been identified. However, that means that the whole biome of the planet that has living creatures, and particularly any living creature that has a brain and a nervous system and brain waves, is going to be entrained to the 7.83 hertz as the frequency for the whole biome, which means we have a version of what I'm doing with the live streams where we have a whole giant group of people with headphones on, and you're all listening to the same brainwave entrainment soundtrack, and we cause synchronicity of consciousness in huge groups of people. This is a synchronization, I think, a synchronization factor of the Earth's biome as a director of a symbiosis. In other words, instead of the symbiosis of different systems depending on each other to be alive and forming the biome, there's a central organizing factor of the 7.83 hertz that orchestrates that so it keeps it in tune. Because 7.83 hertz is not a tone, it's below 20 hertz, so it's not a tone. But it has all these octaves and harmonics, and if you add them up high enough, you do get a tone. So it means that I would think, according to that, you've got the 80-20% rule on a bell curve thing. 80% of the biome will respond, 20% will be weird, maybe not respond.
Well, there's also the cell phone towers and Wi-Fi that wipe it out.
Well, that's just messing the whole thing up. I mean, that's why we're all so under stress, because our bio clocks are trying to time to wave, electromagnetic fields in the world to dance with to save energy. And now we've screwed that all up with man-made frequencies that aren't dancing. So we just got tricked into dancing with a partner that's not dancing back. And what we thought we were doing it for was to save energy, and we're actually expending twice as much energy to dance with a partner that doesn't dance back. So it just empties your system. It burns your system out.
So how does your frequency interact with the Schumann?
My personal biotone frequency?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your own metabolism rhythm where you're at peace.
Well, the 7.83 hertz is one of those borderline brain states between alpha and theta. So, and remember, those are all malleable. The brain states of the ranges of beta and alpha and theta and delta those ranges are set by statistical studies of large population groups of people's brains. So one textbook is going to be a little different from another textbook. This one will say that, alpha is 13 hertz down to 8. Another one will say it's down to 7. So it's someplace between 7 and 8, and that's where the Schumann resonance is, 7.83. And that's where the flow state is. But the flow state is specific to your brain.
So it's a little bit different for everybody?
Everybody's unique to them. But that would also fall within a bell curve study of you're pretty safe to get 80% of the people respond to a generic soundtrack for the flow state if you put it at 7.8, if you put it at 7.5 hertz. There's a hardwired thing in your brain to put you into the flow state, but there's not a hardwired thing in your brain for the Schumann resonance. That's an external factor that's affecting you, that's entraining you to a general something that the biome responds to and puts you in sync with the biome in a better way. Some people's personal flow state frequency may be very close to that at 7.8 hertz. And so those kind of people are even more drawn to the global biome resonance entrainment. And those would be the kind of people that you would expect to be biologists and people who study plant life and anything that's in the biome, that would be that group.
Or somebody that just lives out in nature and never talks to anybody.
Yeah, be drawn there because of yeah.
Okay, so these borderline, I got really interested in the borderline because, I'm really, to find the person's note or rhythm when they're at peace is what you're doing, or balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Yes.
Right. And so,
zero stress in the system.
but then there's the borderline, which is not the center of your frequency. It's it's like right on the edge.
It's on the edge.
It's like, and that's, so I got like, okay, which do we do? Or do we do,
that's an interesting point. So when we find this frequency that balances the autonomic into the zero stress place, and we calculate all the octaves of that, those octaves yield a series of brain frequencies that are very precise in beta, alpha, theta, and delta. And what those represent is turning on the healing program for that brain frequency range. In other words, turning on homeostasis in the autonomic nervous system when you're entrained to that frequency, and homeostasis is a prerequisite for healing. So it means if I'm slowing down in theta to a key theta frequency that unlocks the program for homeostasis in the autonomic nervous system, that's where I go in dreaming sleep to heal my emotions. That's where it's turning that program on. But if I want to figure out what's the borderline between my theta and my alpha, right, then that's going to be a harmonic, right? So it'd be so if I've got the homeostasis point in beta and the homeostasis point in alpha and the homeostasis point in theta, that a harmonic of this distance is going to be the borderline.
Cool. So you got really both at the same time. You're not really doing one or the other. The fundamental is doing the homeostasis, and then the harmonic is doing the borderline. So you got two things going at once.
Calculate the borderlines, and
now that makes way more sense.
The whole concept of the borderlines is another big mind blower for me, because I already had recognized that when alpha is slowing down from 13 hertz down to, let's say, 7.5, where the borderline is. When it crosses over that borderline and becomes alpha, alpha slows down and crosses the borderline and becomes theta. There's a bigger difference than just a little bit of speed. 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, and then it crosses over and it becomes theta. Yes, there's a difference in speed, but theta is a different waveform. It looks different on EEG. Somebody has hit a switch and alpha has stopped and theta has started. And one is a little bit higher speed and the other is a little bit lower speed, but the amplitude is completely different, and theta has what's called spindle cell activity and spikes and weird stuff in it, and it looks different as a waveform. So now I'm reading these news feeds that are telling me that access to long-term memory is at the borderline between theta and delta, somewhere around 4 hertz. In other words, that's where, if you entrain to that place, it opens the doors to long-term memory, and everything you study goes directly in without having to memorize.
So what we should have, this is what I would expect from you by next year. We need a device that does an assessment on you, finds your borderline in your pocket, in your phone, and whenever you can't remember somebody's name or anything, you just play it for a minute, and all of a sudden you remember everything.
Yep, that's what we're up to. Cloud-based system in your phone.
Not to mention a cure for the effects of dementia.
Well, that's got, dementia and cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. We know that those are, at the very least, associated with problems with the default mode network. That these 4 zones in the brain that are supposed to be synchronized, if they become unsynchronized to any degree, it's every neurological condition you've ever heard of. ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, epilepsy, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression, schizophrenia. It's amazing. All of those different conditions have one condition underlying that they have in common. So if you could figure out a way to brainwave and train to default mode network.
Oh, that seems like really simple.
You do it with headphones.
How about electrodes? Electrodes are ultrasound localized on those spots and tuned to you. The potential here seems massive.
The answer to that is simple brainwave entrainment. You're just entraining.
But how do you localize the frequencies going in the ears to those 4 different spots? Because the ears are like a little funnel.
No, because that's how I use psychoacoustic 3D processing, and you're an expert on that too. You wrote a whole book about that.
Oh, so just
that means that we're
taking
binaural beats, and we are placing them specifically, and a second set of binaural beats are rotated this way. So we've got. So I was doing that work in the 90s with neurofeedback, with brain.
Yeah, it seems that like localized ultrasound could be even more effective, right?
Ultrasound would be more effective. It was used in the way that, so this is also way back. This is back in the early 90s. There was an article in the San Diego Union newspaper about a guy named Woody Norris, who is an inventor, and a company he had called American Technology. He had invented a new kind of speaker system, and when I read that article, I called up and talked to somebody there, and they said, why don't you come on down? We're doing a demo tomorrow at 3. Turned out to be a dog and pony show for investors, but it was still cool. And so they've got a big amplifier and 2 big speakers. So they're like big speakers, but they were 1/8 of an inch thick. just they look like a screen door, a window screen, and it's got a nice big fidelity sound of some orchestra playing, and then he invites everybody to come up and put your ear on the speaker, and there's no sound there. The sound is coming by vibrating air molecules between the two speakers. To me, that sounds like binaural beats, because that's what's happening with binaural beats. You're not hearing the beat out of either speaker. You shut one speaker off and it collapses, right? So what he was doing was there was these miniature ultrasound nodules in these speakers, and the ultrasound from one speaker to the next was untuned slightly to the other speaker between 20 and 20,000 hertz. So the sound waves were rising in the air molecules between the speakers, the same mechanism that's used with binaural beats. And I'm just going, blew the head of top of my head off. I'm going, that is a absolutely brilliant idea. And it means, and he had this thing that was very cool. It was a ring with a handle, and the ring had these nodules, and he could create like a laser beam of sound waves. Sound waves disperse everywhere. I mean, the concept of laser beam sound waves is ridiculous. That doesn't work, but it does if it's ultrasound, right? So every other nodule is untuned from the other one by 20 to 20,000 hertz. And all these 40 people are sitting in folding chairs, and he's, pointing this thing at your head. And when it hits your head, you can hear the music inside your head like you've got headphones on, and nobody else around you can hear it.
Oh.
Right? So when he moves it past you to the person next to you, it's like the searchlight moves aside and you don't hear anything anymore. That was mind-blowing. And so I contacted them and said, can we do this in the body? Can we put nodules on either side of the skull and focus the crossover on a tumor and smash the wine glass? And they said, nice idea, but we don't have any kind of expertise on colloidal fluids or body fluids or anything like that. It's just air molecules.
Well, there's that company in Israel, in SciTech, that's actually figured out how to localize ultrasound in very specific spots
But that's what they're doing. That's the idea that I had in the early 90s. That's exactly what they're doing. They're creating ultrasound and ultrasound on either side of the head, slightly untuned, and the crossover point is wherever you want it to go.
So it seems like I haven't heard you talk about brain maps lately, which is really, this is similar, but what I'm thinking is, why not measure a person's brain with every way you can when they are running love, or running universal love, or running compassion, or running gratitude, and then be able to train them back into their pattern whenever you want, because you know exactly what their brain does, or somewhat at least what their brain does when.
I think that if we do some Google searches, we would find that's probably already been done. So here's another article from my news feeds just last week. So we talked about the borderline states, that the borderline between one state and the next has special meaning. It means that the borderline that we would cross over and not think about it, actually, if you zoom into it, it's a zone of its own. It's actually a brainwave state of its own. So calling it a borderline state is no longer correct. It's another brainwave zone of activity. The zone between beta and alpha is high IQ. That's what they saw with prodigy kids with IQ of 180 and above. A lot of activity at the borderline between beta and alpha. So if you entrain there, bang, right? So, however, for the last few years, there's been increasing evidence and particularly just last week, of non-borderline interactions between brainwaves for specific things. And the very first one that I heard of was gamma. Gamma is called the binding frequency because it takes information from various areas of the cortex from the five senses. So seeing is back here in the occipital zone, and hearing is in the temporal zone, and on. Pulls information from all those different areas and binds them all together in one spot and synchronizes them all up together. So my experience out here in the world, my sensory experience, hangs together and makes sense. Right, things that I can see that make noise, I know they belong together because it's synchronized up here. But that tells you if you get a problem with gamma and synchronizing of those senses, you get dissociative disorders and sort of schizophrenia things and advanced stages of autism and stuff like that. But later on, they found out how gamma is doing that binding. Gamma is modulating theta brain activity generated from the hippocampus. And it turns out that the article I just got shows that each of the brainwave categories is generated from a different place in the brain. Theta is generated from the hippocampus, which means it's generated from emotions, and that would make sense because that's where emotions get healed in dreaming sleep. So gamma is modulating theta like that's how FM radio is made. It lifts the information right out of the brain into a wireless communication network, an internet of the brain that has no physical wiring between neurons or brain areas.
You know, I never asked you the question from the beginning, and that is, if you had all the money in the world, there is so much potential of things you're talking about with, like, you know, a few $1 billion. I mean, we could get rid of most emotional, mental issues right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I had all the money in the world, I would establish a world-class research center where a holistic approach to health gets all the cool tools that only modern medicine gets to play with. fMRI machines and squid devices and $500,000 EEG brain mapping equipment and all the rest of that stuff is what a holistic world needs to be using to experiment, to upgrade the Newtonian worldview of modern medicine into the quantum view of holistic medicine. Right?
And it's not just healing, it's getting us freaking high. It's like higher consciousness.
It's the foundation of a new 21st century science of expansion of consciousness and self-awareness.
Cool.
Which we desperately need in order to evolve, right?
I think it's on the way.
It's happening.
So I think we're about out of time. Anything else you want to share before we end?
Well, you know, the first thing I do when I get that money and establish this huge center is call all of the crazy people in the world up that I know, like you, and say, this is not just a me thing. I've got my little piece of the puzzle. I love the piece of the puzzle that you're doing. I mean, I've said this to you before. I have trouble getting, you know, 2 or 3 people over for dinner. Never mind organizing some crazy thing like this, for God's sake. I don't know how you do it. but praise to you for the work that you're doing to spread that word, to get an audience to great ideas that can galvanize the conscious minds of huge groups of people, which is what we need to change the world, right?
Yeah, think tank on the way. I think that's the deal.
Yeah. Anyway, so thanks again for your part in the madness of the crazy people trying to save the world.
Yeah, and thank you for your work too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good talking to you.
Next time.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Blessings.
This has been a presentation of New Earth One Network, your home for New Earth living. Access information, education, and videos on living from the heart in unity consciousness. Visit newearth1.com.